Welcome to the series seminar video tutorials Germanische Heilkunde by Dr. Gerd Hummer, MD. My name is Helmut Pilhar. I am the father of Olivia, and Dr. Hummer's appointed lecturer on Germanische Heilkunde, theory. The Hummer focus in computer tomography is the proof that the biological conflict, the DHS, is the cause of the various diseases. The established system likes to deny this fact, and reinterpret the Hummer focus as an artifact. In the healing phase, edema is deposited in these brain relays, interpreted as a brain tumor in conventional medicine. However, there is no nerve cell division after birth. We also find this Hummer focus on the organ level, on the skin, and even at the leaves of plants. A look into the brain CT is a look into the depth of the soul of the human being. One can see precisely where the problem is hidden. And since Germanische Heilkunde applies equally to the animal, we now also understand the language of the animal. The objective is to learn to understand why X-ray imaging is needed, and not magnetic resonance imaging, MRI. And to distinguish between a Hummer focus and an artifact. But what will you do if the intracranial pressure gets too high? You will learn more about this in the approximately 1-hour seminar video tutorial. Ladies and gentlemen, I welcome you to this seminar video tutorial of Germanische Heilkunde by Dr. Gerd Hummer, MD. My name is Helmut Pilhar. I am the lecturer appointed by Dr. Hummer for the Germanische Heilkunde theory, which is a great honor for me. Initially, I was an engineer. I graduated from the Higher Technical School for Electrical Engineering, and a second time for Mechanical Engineering in Wiener Neustadt. Ultimately, I worked as a software engineer. Since 1990 I have been married to my wife Erika, with whom I have 4 now grown-up children. We have also been grandparents several times. Due to the cancer of our then 6-year-old daughter Olivia in 1995, we ended up seeing Dr. Hummer and got caught up in a medical battle that continues to this day. Since 1997, I have been teaching Germanische Heilkunde of Dr. Hummer. Dr. Hummer sadly left us in 2017. But he left us his important legacy. In my opinion, there is no more important knowledge than this. The knowledge about the correlations of how our bodies and psyche function. What could be more important than knowing how our bodies function? How do diseases arise, and what should I do for them to disappear again? What does materialism benefit me, if I am physically and psychologically ill? Nothing. Right? With this, Dr. Hummer has made himself immortal. Future generations will be grateful to Dr. Hummer for his discoveries. If we don't let this knowledge be taken away from us. And this has been attempted since the discovery in 1981. The question is whether, will we let this happen again, as it has happened many times in the past with other significant discoveries? The topic of this seminar video tutorial is the brain CT and the Hummer's focus. The Hummer's focus is the proof that Dr. Hummer is correct. It is actually quite simple. Note: the individual is an indivisible unit between organs and psyche. But that also means that the stomach tumor or the colon cancer is related to the mother-in-law, for example. If I solve the conflict with the mother-in-law, I get into the healing phase with stomach cancer, or the colon cancer. This of course places me as an affected person in a position to become the chief over my own primal personal affairs. So, between me and my health, there is neither a doctor nor medicine. No doctor can heal, and no medicine can cure. Only the symptom is affected by the medicine. Whether it is called medicine or coffee, which of course also has an effect on our body, just like tea or cola. But no medicine can solve my conflict. I can only do that myself. This knowledge, this secret, is kept hidden from us. We still have the brain CT. In the active phase, the Hummer focus is always disc-shaped. In the healing phase, edema is stored. This is squeezed out through the crisis, and then connective tissue forms in the brain relay. In the brain CT we can recognize whether the conflict is active, has already been resolved, or whether it has been completed. Wherever the Hummer focus is located in the brain, it provides information about the conflict and the organ symptom. Dr. Hummer casually drew the map of the brain as well. As a result, we have an overdetermined diagnostic system. Suppose I want to describe a straight line mathematically in space, and I know only one point. Then this straight line can go through this one point in an infinite number of ways. To mathematically determine a straight line in space, I need 2 points. And we have even a third point. We can test our calculation against it, as it were. The conventional physician uses only the organ level, only this one point. He leaves out the psyche. In the psyche, he is not interested at all. He finds the mental distress of prostitutes disgusting. He cannot or will not put himself in the patient's shoes, and the brain CT is simply ignored. In conventional medicine, or rather in the matrix that controls us. For it is not only conventional medicine that boycotts the Germanische Heilkunde. The whole system boycotts it. Because otherwise, the system would lose power over us. It is not only about medicine, it is also about socio-political aspects. Society is making us sick, and if I understand that now, I will change our society. And that's not what they want. They want us to remain labor slaves. That's why this is being boycotted watertight. This is a real suppression of knowledge. I'm in the middle of all this. I'm experiencing all this, it's real. If it weren't so criminal, you'd really have to say, hats off. All due respect for the achievement. For us lay people, the level of the brain is not accessible. Because who can read a brain CT? But no one knows your organ level, your pimple on the partner's shoulder better than yourself. And nobody knows your psyche better than yourself. And that should always be in synchronicity. Nevertheless, it does not hurt to know what is going on in the brain relay. There are more and more people practicing brain CT reading. I never had the ambition to do this, because I was always afraid of being seen as a therapist. Not only to face trouble with the authorities, but also not to have any responsibility towards the patient. Being a therapist does involve a bit more than being an electrical engineering, mechanical engineer, and someone who can't even see blood. That's why I never had the ambition to learn it, and it's not always handled properly either. Nevertheless, it is good if one knows what it is all about. Recording process. We need computed tomography, CT. This is an X-ray layer technique. The device is basically a ring in which an X-ray rotates. One is transported through the device. The recording takes about 4 minutes. It is not particularly loud. While magnetic resonance, MRI, that's a tunnel. There's a giant magnetic coil there. The patient is in a powerful magnetic field. The body is mainly made up of water. The water molecule is a bipole. It has a north and south pole, so to speak. Because of this powerful magnetic field, these water molecules are aligned, like iron filings in the magnetic field. And at the same time, they are being hurled back and forth. If you look at the skull bone on the X-ray, the CT, it's all white. Whereas with magnetic resonance it's somewhat transparent. By the way, this is the same patient in the different imaging procedures. But you can see the edema much better on the magnetic resonance than on the X-ray. The exciting thing is that Dr. Hummer was the first to discover the edemas. Not the active Hummer's focus, but the edema. The healing phase. He also said then, that there should be an active phase. We see the edemas in both procedures. In the magnetic resonance, better than in the X-ray. But we only see the active Hummer focus in the X-ray and not in the magnetic resonance. Only when they are ancient old, does it become visible in the magnetic resonance. Then one also sees it in the active phase. But by that time, they must be very old. Why the active Hummer foci can only be seen on the X-ray and not in magnetic resonance, obviously must have something to do with the nature of the Hummer foci. What are they exactly? You can certainly see them with the naked eye in the open brain. You can also see the Hummer focus on the leaves of the plants or on the animal's fur, or on the skin, or in the bone you can also see it. But what it is exactly, nobody knows. The exciting thing is this falx. The two hemispheres of the brain are held together by the bridge. I'm sure you've seen that before. The bridge itself is just connective tissue. The cerebral cortex is the outer layer of the brain. That's where you have to imagine the homunculus, which goes into this falx, this fissure. I show that a little more detailed in the seminar tutorial brain relay brain map. There's the motor cortex, which is about a finger wide and goes down the falx to the bottom of the bridge. Suppose I suffer a motor conflict for the partner and child. Let's say my partner leaves me and takes my child. Now I cannot hold the partner, and I cannot hold the child. Then I have the partner and mother-child side, right and left affected. That is then crossed from brain to organ. Then I have the Hummer focus as a so-called central conflict. Then I have a Hummer focus over both hemispheres. That is disc-shaped and covers both hemispheres, but there is nothing in the center. That's where the falx is. So, there's a cleft there. And the Hummer focus goes across this cleft that separates the two cerebral hemispheres. Dr. Hummer also speaks of a standing wave. As an electrical engineer, you can imagine that. And this standing wave can also be seen with X-rays. But not with magnetic resonance. That is an entirely different procedure. For example, I can take a picture of the Porsche with a camera, But I can't measure its speed. I need another device for that. That's roughly how you should imagine it. Whereas conventional doctors use the PET procedure when they are looking for metastases. That one shows the metabolism. A metastasis is nothing but a follow-up conflict, a follow-up cancer. The cribbing scribbling cells is nonsense. I have with any special program in a healing phase the edema in the brain. It doesn't matter what it's called, whether one calls it diarrhea or pimples, or foot fungus. Then this brain relay stores edema and connective tissue fluid. Then something happens in the brain. And you can see that very nicely in the PET. I don't know if Dr. Hummer ever asked for a PET. Magnetic resonance, certainly he does. Also, the magnetic resonance of the organ level. Like I said, that all have advantages and disadvantages. What do I want to do with them? That's what it's all about. To delineate liquid things, you use magnetic resonance. To delineate chalky things, you use X-ray. The brain CT or computed tomography is the diagnostic tool of choice in Germanische Heilkunde. Someone who pretends to be a Hummer therapist and can't read brain CT, forget it. Turn around and go away. That is such a buffoon, as Dr. Hummer calls them. Cross-sections. This is another magnetic resonance. You can see that right away. If you have seen a few brain CTs and a few magnetic resonances, you can immediately recognize that this is a computed tomography and that a magnetic resonance. One can layer as one wishes, because the computer generates the image. Whereas with computed tomography, the patient is fed through the ring with a board. That too, is calculated by the computer, but the layers are predetermined. They're all slices. That's actually how computed tomography works. We need the CT scan parallel to the skull base. Which brain CT? The skull base is actually the hat rim. This is how you can remember it. You go to the radiologist and tell him, please, without contradiction, I would like a brain CT and not an MRI scan. Then he is annoyed with you for the first time. With the CT scan he converts $200 with the MRI $600. Without contrast medium, because most patients come to him in a healing phase. So 80% of the patients are in a healing phase. Then you have your inevitable edema in the brain. The contrast medium shows this edema in greater detail. Its sole purpose is to make it easier for radiologists to find so-called brain tumors. A brain tumor, in the sense that there would be a division of nerve cells, does not exist. There is no nerve cell division after birth. You can picture the edema in the brain as a drop of water falling on a sponge. The sponge sucks up the water. The exact process happens in the brain in the healing phase. That is a space-demanding process. In fact, tumor actually means space-demanding as well. But it is not in the sense of a cell division. So, it is not a division of nerve cells. If you do it using a contrast agent, you see the edema particularly impressively. And then the blind radiologist yells, "Whoa, look! A brain tumor!" And then the poor patient falls into a deep hole. To spare him this diagnosis, we tell him to have it done without a contrast medium. We can see the edemas even without it, so I don't need a contrast medium for that. It's not harmless either. There is the possibility of anaphylactic shock, people have died from that. It's an overreaction of the body. We just don't need the contrast agent. It would be just as well if you were to have a brain CT with a contrast agent. Then you'd be lucky. But we don't need it. We also say without contrast to protect the patient. To protect him from the conventional doctor and also from the side effects. You just tell the radiologist you have an intolerance. Just make something up, you get sick or dizzy or unwell. Make something up. You can let your imagination run wild. If he asks you why you need it, you say, in the living room, I have a white wall, and I would like to have my brain CT there. I've been walking around with my brain there all my life, and I don't know what it looks like. Or, I made a bet with a friend that I have a brain, and he now wants the proof on the table. With the CT scans, I am winning the bet. That's not the radiologist's business at all. Or tell him that your uncle, Dr. Donald Duck, likes it this way. Your colleague wants it this way, no idea why. You pay cash, and then he sends it to you. As I said, it cost about $200. You can also get a referral prescribed. But since the Olivia story, it must be prescribed by a head doctor. So, there's a head doctor at the health insurance company, and he approves or doesn't approve. Then you often have to go through all kinds of contortions. So if you can afford it and want to avoid the whole discussion, just pay $200. A few signatures, and then it is issued on paper. But you should always ask for it on CD-ROM. On paper it has no resolution, on CD-ROM it does. If you have problems with the eye, retinal detachment, jawbone, or cervical spine, have those layers recorded at the same time. Then you won't have to go under CT a second time. The standard layer is enough on its own. So if you say to the radiologist, standard layer, he knows it's parallel to the base of the skull, with 30 images. You can have 50, but it's not necessary. Standard is enough. Well, then you have the brain CT, and where do you go with that? Example CT. This is a brain CT on film. If it went through the hands of Dr. Hummer, it also has arrows stuck on it. Correct position. One must hold it right. There is always an L, and that means left. It should be on the left side, but then the writing is mirrored. That's because the conventional doctor always looks at the patient in his mind from the bottom up. We always look from top to bottom. So, you have to hold it correctly. Then on the right side, you have the right hemisphere of the brain. This is for the right-handed person, the mother-child side, the left body side. Then you hold it correctly. Then at the bottom of the picture, you have for example the cerebellum. Slide layers. Then you often have an overview picture with a number. Then you know which layer the picture is from. Those who can read it can orient themselves based on the ventricles. There are cavities in the brain, and they are filled with cerebrospinal fluid. That is also connected to the spinal cord. That's also where you see, for example this falx, this separation of the brain's hemispheres. The Hummer focus just overflows it, although there is nothing there. It's a fissure. No one knows precisely what it is. I was talking to two physicists once. They both said it must be a Lowy diagram. Lowy himself was a physicist. When one strikes light on a prism, the light is split into spectral colors. Comparably, it works that way with X-rays, when they hit a crystal. Then there is such a ring structure. So, both physicists said, independently, that this must be a Lowy diagram. I can't judge that. Dr. Hummer also always said, before he says nonsense, he'd rather say nothing. These Hummer foci are just facts that one can reproduce. Like, with gravity, no one can explain it either. Earth's gravity. There is no way to isolate or shield that force. There isn't. No matter how thick the lead sheet is, the apple still falls down. No one can explain that. What causes masses to attract each other? These forces. How are they given? Can they be influenced or controlled? There's also the UFO technology and stuff. Anti-gravity, and that's what they're all sinking their teeth into. Siemens about artifacts. The most superficial argument against these Hummer foci reads, this is simply dealing with interference from the CT machine. Artifacts. There are indeed artifacts. It looks like a Hummer focus, but it is not. The Siemens company produces such CT scanner devices. If their machine shows something, the manufacturer should be able to say what it is. Together with Dr. Hummer, they worked out criteria to distinguish an artificial product from a real Hummer focus. Namely, the Hummer focus can hang from the skull like a half ring. The artifact is always circular. The Hummer focus may be dented, the artifact is always circular. The artifact is also always precisely in the fulcrum of the device. The Hummer focus can also be, for example, right outside in the cerebellum and nowhere else. Of the different ring structures, only one can be the artifact. The other must be something else. An artifact cannot form edema, cannot have progression. But in the case of the Hummer focus, this is very possible. By the way, this also proves that there is no brain tumor. Because where the alleged brain tumor is, there used to be a Hummer focus, target-shaped, sharp-edged. All these attempts to explain away the Hummer focus are just ridiculous. If one day this comes to light, this suppression of knowledge. Because that is what is costing our family members their lives. Like on the assembly line. When the neighbor realizes that the gentle oncologist killed his child, I prefer not to know what the neighbor will do to the oncologists. Because they are killing against their better knowledge. We can also repeat the shot and move the patient by 2 inches. The real Hummer focus, of course, must move along with the patient. The artifact always remains in the pivot of the machine. So, there are very simple exclusion criteria. You can find this document on the internet or in the literature, in Dr. Hummer's books. I just want to say, who can judge this better than the manufacturer himself, what this should represent? Medical Association, January 7, 2007. Here is the Medical Association, CT examinations of the brain to detect the Hummer focus, No justifiable indication. Artifact imaging has no benefit to patient health. And they're not even lying with that. Picturing an artifact also really does nothing. It's not real, it's just an artifact. But the nasty thing is, they equate the Hummer focus with an artifact. The fish always starts to stink by the head. And these godforsaken people know all about that. It doesn't matter if they are the presidents of the medical associations or the minister of health. They all know it. But as a loafer, they are beholden to other powers. They know what will happen if they don't. Their mission is to keep you in the belief that nothing is wrong. Real artifact. So, the big ring is an artifact. Inside of this, somewhere is a real Hummer focus. Just as I said. There, on the upper right, I suspect one too, but I'm not 100% sure. And with the one on the left, I'm not exactly sure what that is he's referring to either. I can't really judge. Progression 1989 to 2007. This is a fascinating shot. This is the same patient. The top row from 1989 and the bottom from 2007, so 18 years later. There you can see, for example, a Hummer focus going over this falx, across the fissure. It's like a standing wave. What is that exactly? Dr. Hummer explained it to me. The determining factor is the center. Where is the center? Here it is in the relay for the bone membrane of the legs, left and right. A brutal separation. He basically has rheumatoid arthritis. In the lower images, he has the whole thing in hanging healing. The top row is permanently conflict active. A brain CT like this is a snapshot. In any case, the top row is conflict active. The bottom one is at least a healing stage, but there are clear recurrences. Dr. Hummer explains the whole thing as follows. The brain relay is of course three-dimensional. So, the area of the brain involved can be spherical, lens-shaped, or cylindrical. I can also suffer a conflict where the Hummer focus goes like a tube through the cerebral cortex, the cerebral medulla, and down to the brain stem. Then of course, these brain relays are all involved at the time of the conflict. Then he has reacted with the glandular tissue, the connective tissue and the squamous epithelium. That also exists like a rod or a tube. Now in the healing phase comes the edema, the connective tissue fluid. This is like the sponge that sucks up the water. The nerve tissue, the nerve cells and the dendrites are intertwined. Now the entire tissue is stretching, and that of course causes brain symptoms. Dr. Hummer explains this as if one were building a house and then renovating it. So, everything is soaked with edema, and the nerve tissue is in there. Then it is squeezed out by the crisis, and glia, scar tissue is deposited. At the end of the healing process, the house is newly insulated, so to speak. This is how you can imagine it. The swelling decreases, the scar tissue remains. This is glia. This is a specific type of connective tissue, found only on nerves. You can find it on nerve sheaths, for example the sebaceous retention cyst. This is such a proliferation of connective tissue. It is a particular connective tissue that occurs only on the nerves. At the end of the healing phase, everything works again. It's like when I cut myself, I have a scar, but everything works again. Dr. Hummer explains the Hummer focus. I put a video on YouTube. I dug it up again. I didn't even know I had it anymore. These are old recordings. It must be from the late 80s. That's what I was looking for. Yeah, this Hummer focus. You can see it obviously, there is the center and around it, where the arrow is. The whole area is then involved. That's where Dr. Hummer explains the difference between an accurate Hummer focus and an artifact. But there is something else that I discovered, that is very interesting. And that is this. In Hummer Compass, a crisis is missing. He only discovered around 1990 that every program has a crisis. If you study Hummer's literature, you can really follow that he discovered the handedness and the two phases. He discovered the two-phasicity already with the first law. He knew that the cause had to be the shock. Then the symptom is gone, so there must also be a healing phase. To the extent that the conflict is definitively resolved, There is a healing phase, and at some point, he is healthy again. Very few do not survive. Most do survive. This is also a point where conventional medicine lies to us. They admit that there is spontaneous healing. What does that mean? This means, there must be an active phase of cancer. Or a phase in which it develops and a phase in which it disappears again. For example, one sees a fist-sized tumor in the liver and 6 months later it is gone. That is what we call spontaneous healing. So, there must be a developmental phase for cancer and a healing phase for cancer. That, as it were, encapsulates spontaneous healing. But have you ever heard of an oncologist who says to his patient, "Oh, you are currently in a healing phase"? No. You will never hear that. That's where you can see that they are lying to us. After all, it's so easy to see through if you think about it a little bit. But when we cross the threshold at the doctor's office, we surrender the mind. Those are the gods in white. There is also hardly a profession that is advertised as much as for the medical profession. TV shows such as Schwarzwald Clinic, Emergency Room, GTST, and Centrum West program people every day to be the perfect patient. Radiation load. Of course, a brain CT also has a radiation load. For comparison, a dental picture has 1/100th millisievert, a brain cord 3, a belly cord 20 at once. Of course, you don't do it every day for fun, but when you need to. If it's on or off, that is, one needs to check something, you may need such a CT every few weeks. Of course, it is also a question of weighing up what it brings me and the disadvantages. But this radiation is not that enormous either. You can roughly compare it to an Atlantic flight, there and back. Then you have the same natural radiation exposure. Or, with a week in the high mountains, you also have the same amount of radiation exposure. One can also exaggerate it. It's like they are trying to scare us away. I have a brain CT done every 5 years. As I said, it is the diagnostic tool of choice. We have an immediate overview of everything and we do not have to ask many questions. It is often the case that the patient cannot remember with the best will in the world. But if the brain CT shows something, then there must have been something. Then one must give him time to think and have him come back in 14 days. We must then be persistent. Of course, asking the right questions is also an art. Or if something terrible happens at some point, that when you've calmed down again, have a brain CT to see if there's anything there. Has something happened that I need to watch out for or counteract? Many people resolve their conflicts by chance. For example, he retired, and 6 weeks later he died of a heart attack. He suffers a loss of territory in the company, and with retirement a new phase of life begins for him. Then you resolve the conflict, and that was it. The socially acceptable early retirement by death. The finance minister is happy with it. He has paid taxes all his life and can't take advantage of it. We would recognize that in advance. We see that, oops, the conflict with the boss is active. If you resolve that, the healing is inevitable, and you don't survive the crisis. That won't help you. Stay in the company. We can take countermeasures in advance, so that he does not resolve the conflict. That's the optimal preventive research. It costs $200, and you have everything in view. But the therapist in Germanische Heilkunde must be a specialist in everything. He must know his way around the eye, the bone, and the uterus. Specialization no longer exists in Germanische Heilkunde. That is the depreciated medicine, the so-called conventional medicine. Question 1 on slide 34, top center of the photo, you said this would be the leg trade, the Hummer focus is right in the middle, near the neck. However, according to the scientific chart, the opening is not labeled at all, so I can't find a match between the chart and the photo. Question 2, in the same photo at about 7 o'clock, a Hummer focus can be seen. I always see too much, there could be anything. So it must be a closed ring structure, that can be one ring or several rings. But wait, where is the best place to show it to you? The best place to show it to you is here, and that's with the motor cortex center, right here. So there we have this bridge. Yes, that's the connective tissue, there are no nerves. And this is the cerebral cortex. And you may have seen this before. Drawn over the brain of a person, cut in half like this. With such a thick lip, thick tongue. And if you look, there's the motor function, lip. And the motor function for the lips is much bigger, much bulkier, much more voluminous than the hip. And motor-wise we can also do a lot with the lips. While with the knee and the hip, that's just a movement. I don't need that much brain power. And in the same way from the motor system, the signals go down to the musculature. Here in the red section, there's the sensory. Here we also have more brains than we need for the knee, for example. We are also very sensitive with the lips. We have many nerve endings there, but not so with the knee. And if an ant walks across our lip, we notice it right away. With the knee you don't notice it right away. And this information, the signals come from the organ to the brain, and the sensory system is precisely on the opposite. Here I need more brain to process this information than it would need in the sensory system for the knee. The sensory system, for example, is the outer skin. A bit further back is the periosteum. There we have the motor function, here we have the sensory function, and there we have the periosteum. And also at that point, so there is for example the knee. There we have the sensory system, the skin. And there we have the motor system. So, a Hummer focus would be at the center, if for example the knee was paralyzed. And of course crossed out, left for the right knee. And below that, there's the leg. And there's the foot. You see that you can do a lot motor-wise, and you're also very sensitive sensually. So, when your partner puts your big toe in his mouth, you give in. And that is now the cavity, so to speak. If I now have a Hummer focus, I cannot hold the partner and the child, so to speak. I now have the Hummer focus throughout the brain and across the fox. Even there is no brain tissue at all. And how precisely? Nobody knows. And there they have it a little bit, let's say the homunculus, whether that's the lip or the tongue. And this is already known in conventional medicine. We also know that if you turn off the patient's motor skills on the right side, and you're generous, you cut out half the brain, then you know he's paralyzed on the left side. So yes, they know that. And they let him walk around with half a brain. And he survives a few years, and then they're happy, because he lives another 2 years with half a brain. They don't like to cut into the brainstem, because then they get quickly respiratory failure, and then when the patients always die right on the operating table, it's annoying. And it harms the reputation. You just don't cut into the brain. You don't do that. That's malpractice. That's our computer. That's like ripping a chip out of the computer off the motherboard, off the circuit board. I don't know what still works and what doesn't anymore. You don't do that. You don't cut into the brain. And Hummer was able to make this much more precise with the Hummer focus. For example, what is totally unknown in conventional medicine is the heart or diabetes, which is entirely unknown. That right there, that's conventional medicine, that's already known. But Hummer discovered many more brain relays. And let's say, if you think about it, there was once someone who won the Nobel Prize for a heliobacterial ori. 20 years ago he did a self-experiment, he swallowed a cocktail of bacteria. Then he got sick. Then he swallowed an antibiotic and he got better. And 20 years later he got a Nobel Prize for that. And let's just say that the Nobel Prize is worth nothing more than when Obama gets the Nobel Peace Prize. Then it really isn't worth anything anymore. And what are we giving Hummer the Nobel Prize for? For discovering how diabetes works? Or MS? Or for the first law of nature, or for all five? Or for the Hummer focus in the brain? Perhaps for the brain relays he discovered? What did we give him the Nobel Prize for? There is no such thing. What Hummer discovered heralds a new era, certainly in medicine. There will be an era before Hummer and after Hummer. Before Dr. Hummer it was conventional medicine, and after Dr. Hummer it was liberation. Liberation from superstition and tyranny, and from this mass murder. And that's a complete paradigm shift that Dr. Hummer is announcing. Rudolf Virchow. The Hummer focus is the preeminent evidence that the cause of cancer, chronic diseases, and psychoses is the monocausal biological conflict shock. In other words, those diseases that arise by themselves. It has nothing to do with heredity, nothing to do with infection or with carcinogens that don't exist. It is the shock. And the Hummer focus comes into being at this moment, in this second. I will show you another picture where it can also be proved. There you can see that it comes into being at this moment. When it comes to medicine or therapy, knowing the cause is of course the basic prerequisite for successful treatment. Therefore, everything in Germanische Heilkunde revolves around this shock moment. What was going through the patient's mind at the moment of the shock? That determines the special program, the Hummer focus in the brain, and where the tracks are programmed. Then everything runs chronically via the tracks. But every track, every allergy, points back to the conflict. Conventional medicine knows nothing at all about causes. They focus only on symptoms. In the case of a broken leg they know the cause, but that was it. The same applies to alternative medicine. Where does the homeopath know the cause? Or the nutritionist thinks it's because of the diet. Or here Virchow not only said that he dissected so many corpses and never found a soul. The look into the brain CT is a look into the depths of the human soul. We see exactly where the shoe pinches. Often the patient has repressed this, but the programs run nevertheless. If you talk to him about his conflict, the tears flow. If even that gets him out of his psychosis. If he can pour out his heart, then he sees the world very differently. As if a curtain has fallen. So he is essentially liberated. Walt Virchow is the founder of cellular pathology. From him dates the thrust of conventional medicine, that we must seek the cause of disease in the cell. Now they look deeper and deeper into the cell, knowing more and more about less, until they know everything about nothing. This is also nonsense. For example, when the patient has an anger conflict, he has the Hummer focus in the brain stem. Now the villi cells make a cell increase. In cell division, a cauliflower-like colon cancer grows. If you look at these colon cancer cells with the microscope, you can see a difference from the normal colon cells. They are genetically different. But why are they genetically different? Conventional medicine doesn't know that. Why does the cell change? They don't know. They just see that the cell has changed. When the anger conflict is resolved, then the cell division stops. Now the fungi and fungal bacteria, the yellow group, come and recognize these genetically different colon cancer cells and clean them up. But not the others. So, it all works together, it's coherent in itself. Because of this genetic change, they are also recognized by these microbes. These cells are disposable cells. You only need them for the active phase. They help me to produce more digestive juices around the stuck morsel. That's the point of colon cancer. It is not the altered cancer cell that is the problem, it's the cause that's the problem. The morsel conflict, that's the problem. The tumor helps me solve the problem. So, a paradigm shift. Where should I start? With the symptom or with the cause? Of course, I should start with the cause. The whole approach of conventional medicine is to fight these altered cells without considering the brain. That's nonsense, it can't work and it doesn't work. The whole genetic engineering is based on that. To this day, not a single patient has been helped by genetic engineering. But there are many patents on life. They now grow tomatoes that glow neon. Or fish that glow neon. It's terrible. What they are doing is interfering with creation. But they haven't helped anyone yet. Believe it or not, but academic medicine has a worldview that is 100 years old. Like Pasteur, the microbe is the cause, 150 years. And there is no change, just like in the church, that's all dogmatic. Oh dear, if someone breaks out. If it is a member, a doctor, he is immediately excommunicated. He's not allowed to play anymore. Then he is expelled. His license to practice medicine will be taken away from him. Terrible. Tajazan Zeiger, April 2, 2005. Psyche and cancer, researchers search for correlations, the only thing missing is the biological link. The fact that no conclusive link between psyche and cancer has been discovered so far does not necessarily mean that there is none. But it is probably so complicated that it has not been possible to discover it until now. Ha, ha, ha. The Swiss Tajazan Zeiger. They make Dr. Hummer out to be everything. I have even had journalists from the Swiss Tajazan Zeiger in my lectures, but they fundamentally conceal the Hummer focus. I just want to say, this suppression of knowledge is foolproof. They hardly ever mention the Hummer focus. Because that would quickly get into people's heads, like a shock, which you can photograph in the brain? Aha, interesting. Only cost $200 at the nearest radiologist, look at that. Yeah, let's do that sometimes. No, that is kept quiet. The Hummer focus is the proof. Here, this is what I wanted to show you. A patient is in the X-ray machine, and they are making a scan. During the scan, she has an epileptic seizure. Then they repeat the scan 4 minutes later. That's the same layer, you see the same level. You see above that is the forehead cavity or something. On the left image, you don't see anything. The epileptic seizure is the crisis. She probably triggered the track. I don't know. She couldn't escape or whatever. She resolved it, and in the healing she came in the crisis, the epileptic seizure. There you see the edema nicely. So, it arises at that very moment. Or a similar case. The patient comes for a CT and is diagnosed with a brain tumor. The radiologist considers that they should do the scan again. Make the images a little more detailed. On the second image, 15 minutes or half an hour later, he had a Hummer focus in the relay for the pulmonary alveoli in the brainstem. In the first image, there wasn't. Only after the diagnosis, you have a brain tumor, fear of death. And instantly in the second picture, there was a Hummer focus, this occurs at that point. So, the Hummer focus is this missing link between the psyche and the organs. That diseases have something related to the psyche has been suspected by humanity since time immemorial. But people just hadn't understood it yet. With the Hummer focus, Dr. Hummer found the common thread. He also says that it is relatively easy to open the various doors, once you find the key. He has always gone out from the Hummer focus as it were. Now we can photograph the psyche as it were. Also in the animal. If the animal has an anger conflict, it has the Hummer focus in the brain stem and intestinal cancer, just like us humans. Like us humans, the animal has intestines, lungs, a heart, and eyes. The organs have a specific task. When I suffer a conflict in a task, a program starts in that organ that helps me solve the problem. This is actually very logical. In any case, it makes perfect sense to me that it applies not only to us humans but also to animals. They are simply biological conflicts and not psychological problems. Learning to think biologically is the hardest thing for beginners, even for people who have been around longer. We are so psychologized, we think psychologically. For example, if the stronger one defeats the weaker one, we would say, "Wow, how mean he is, he should be punished." Biologically, it is totally different. Biologically, the one who is bitten off worships his victor, homoerotically. He follows him. That's how natural ranking works. Which is also inter-animal, everyone understands that. The dog understands immediately who in the pack is the boss, you have to be careful about him. Inter-animal is understood. That is clear. With a natural law, I don't need a lawyer, it works the same for everybody. It has the religion built in, the creation, the mystery of life. How does that work? Just look around you, how that functions with the religions. I cannot understand that at all. But look in nature, outside. Everything is sprouting. That's the wedding, instantly the pollen flying everywhere. They give birth right away. As soon as it gets warm and snip, they are already engaged in their main activity, propagating. I simply find that beautiful. Germanische Heilkunde is life-affirming. Nothing antibiotics, abortions and anti-baby pills and so on. That's all against life. It's the paradigm shift. The exciting thing is, that Dr. Hummer postulated even this Hummer focus in advance. The name Hummer's focus originated from his opponents, who said, "There you have Hummer again with his weird Hummer focus." He discovered it with his testicular cancer, with the death of his son. Then he interviewed every testicular cancer patient. Each one had suffered a loss of a beloved human being. Then he saw that cervical cancer was always a sexual frustration. The breast is always such a worry conflict. Then he thought, the way someone associates this determines the program? It has to be coordinated somehow. For this, only the brain comes into consideration. In 1983, the first computer tomography machines appeared. There were 2 machines in Germany, and Dr. Hummer jumped on them immediately. There had to be something to find. He discovered the Hummer focus and submitted it to the University of Tübingen as an addition. He filed his habilitation in 1981, the iron rule of cancer, which says that the shock is the cause. That was a sacrilege. That was a reason for burning at the stake, and excommunication. 2 years later he submitted the Hummer focus. He said, "Now you can even photograph it being so." Believe me, the professors are not stupid, just very criminal. They are not serving the one who pays them, but they are serving other powers. That's the problem. That's how our society works right now. Progression in all SBS is the same. In the active phase the Hummer focus is always disc-shaped, regardless of the program. In the healing phase edema is stored. Through the crisis, the edema is squeezed out again. Then scar tissue is stored, it then remains as scarred. The patient is healthy again. Hummer focus active. The specific thing about the Hummer focus in the active phase is as if concentric circles were drawn with a sharp pencil. Sharp-edged, that is the criterion for the active phase. Hummer focus. While here in the photo, it is far from sharp-edged. We can still see the ring structure, but edema is already stored there. So, this photo was taken shortly after the conflict resolution. A few days later, this whole area would have filled dark with edema. Then these rings would also disappear. Here you have the same patient with and without a contrast agent. Of course, the blind radiologist here is yelling, "Whoa, look, a brain tumor." That there is something there, I don't necessarily need contrast medium to make that visible. As I said, it's 3-dimensional. He also resolved the conflict and had his first epileptic seizure. Both men were admitted to the same clinic at the same time. In both they found the edema in the brain. Both were diagnosed with brain tumors. The doctors wanted to cut out the brains of both of them, and they both attended a lecture by Dr. Hummer. And Dr. Hummer said, if you put the CTs of the two men on top of each other, they are almost identical. Then each went his own way. One of them had cerebral surgery. I believe he survived 6 months and then he was dead. The other one went off to get checked out. 5 years later he went for a checkup. The head physician read the diagnosis and said to the patient, you have a brain tumor. Yes, they wanted to operate on me, said the patient. The head physician says, but you are still alive. Says the patient, as you can see. Says the head physician, then the diagnosis can't have been right. Cross out malignant glioblastoma and write benign cavernoma. Of course, three-dimensional connective tissue also forms and then stays that way. Then I have, as it were, a hollow space, a space with scar tissue. Then nothing happens anymore, it stays as it is, if you avoid the track. Then it is considered benign, at the end of the healing. But if it is just developing, then it is malignant. You know, good and evil do not exist in nature. Nature always does only something meaningful. But oncologists are not natural, they could certainly be evil. All healing stages. Whether you call it astrocytoma, glioblastoma, or meningioma, these are always healing phases. It was thought that a meningioma came from the meninges, but of course that's nonsense. The meninges have no SBS program at all. It has neither a cell increase nor a cell decrease. There is also no such thing as meningitis, inflammation of the brain. Inflammation is always healing. Either something tuberculous is broken down, or it is rebuilt under the swelling. But the meninges do nothing at all. What the conventional doctor calls meningitis is simply a brain relay in healing, that lies against the meninges. Usually there is a motor or sensory conflict that is being resolved. This seems to be the larynx, but I'm not sure. A resolved scare-fright conflict or a territory fear conflict. This of course is close to the meninges. The whole term meningioma is faulty. Cyst in the cerebral medulla, a case from the literature. A patient with massive decalcification of the left upper shoulder, now in solution. We see a cyst in the cerebral medulla on the right relay for the left shoulder on the brain CT. So, right for left. The Hummer focus corresponds to a mother-child violation of self-esteem. As a father I was not honest, I harmed my son. So, the bone is also our conscience. There were very frequent recurrences. Eventually there was a final conflict resolution. Due to the long duration and intensity of the conflict, it came to tearing the brain tissue and the formation of the cysts. The shell of the cyst is already filled with scar tissue. The findings seem much worse than they are. Once there was a participant in a Hummer seminar in Spain. An Austrian who lived just around the corner in Spain. He had a brain CT done just for fun, and had the same dumpling as this patient in his brain. He never had any symptoms. That would be an accidental finding. In conventional medicine, that's when cuts are made deep into the healthy. Then you have a person whose nature has changed, and this is irreversible, thus permanent. The Hummer focus also changes the nature of man. With a right-handed man, one conflict is enough and he is homosexual. Then he says, but that comes from within myself. He only thinks that he thinks. In reality he is a thought. Quite impressively, one can see the change in personality in psychosis. But I can solve all that, at least theoretically. Unlike a brain injury, this change of character is irreversible. There is no antidote for that. There is also such a thing as so-called scar epilepsy. He has epileptic seizures as a result of such a brain injury. He doesn't have to deal with conflict, it's irreversible. So, cutting into the brain, you don't do that. All of them. Badly damaged. The brain cut out, a dented head, terrible, terrible. And for nothing, really for nothing. Medication inevitable. Brain edema can become large, if there is a large conflict load behind it. Then I really have to take countermeasures. Of course he could die from brain overpressure. There we also give cortisol, which has a very strong sympathicotonic effect. It reduces edema. It also has side effects, of course. But the most important thing is to preserve life, and that's what this is all about. Brain tumor. Or the conflict load is not that big. But the edema in the brain becomes so large because fluid is retained. Then we talk about the syndrome. The fluid comes from somewhere. It's what we drink ourselves. We can take a bath with 0.9% salt content. The 0.9% salt water makes us feel like we are at home in the primordial sea. Fluid retention is an SBS of the renal collecting ducts. It is a primal program of the brainstem, which our ancestors already had, who still lived in the primal sea. Then we let that primal creature, the worm in us, think, oh, I'm home again. And then we pee more, so then we excrete more water through this 0.9% saltwater bath. Then you have to work with measuring cups. How much water am I taking in, and how much am I excreting? It should not differ too much. If I only pee half a liter, I only have to drink half a liter. Otherwise the edema will get bigger. That's where the bathtub helps. If I have to pee 1.5 liters of that, then I can drink 1.5 liters. One is thirsty when one is in syndrome. Such a person drinks water all day long. RP Online, March 31, 2006. Here is a message from the year 2006. President Sharon. It's been a few years, but he had a terrible stroke. They removed 1/4 of his skull. It may also be that Dr. Hummer recommends sawing away the bone to relieve the pressure. When the edema subsides, the bone can be put back in place. University Medical Center, Rostock, May 20, 2005. Conventional medicine. New procedure for the treatment of brain tumors. In this procedure, after removing the tumor, a balloon catheter is implanted in the patient in the tumor cavity, which is then filled with a radioactive liquid. Then you have a small caster transporter in the brain. You then end up with the chemical waste. According to another newspaper article, they fill the patient's tumor cavity with genetically engineered mouse cells. Let's see what happens next. We certainly won't be able to cure patients with this therapy. But we can offer them an additional procedure. So with such a poor patient from diagnosis to the graveyard, one converts a few $100,000. Who has any interest in there being a simpler method? Health Through Knowledge, January 2, 2007. This 2-year-old girl falls twice hard on the back of her head in the nursery, gets back up and walks around. But the next day the child can't get back on her feet and has terrible vertigo. The mother knows Dr. Hummer, sends him a brain CT of the child and he sees. The child must have fallen. A fall conflict, spinning dizziness is a fall conflict. The mother herself witnessed the fall. Now they knew immediately what the conflict was. Dr. Hummer advised the mother to teach the child to walk again, with a walking school and lots of encouragement and love. Then the ghost quickly passed. But the alternative medicine practitioner wanted to know one more thing. She asked the radiologist how pure conventional medicine would have treated her daughter. She got the honest answer: they would have done another CT, but this time with contrast medium, and then. Radiologist's verbatim statement: tumors appear out of nowhere. The consequences of a purely conventional medical treatment would have been cancer therapy with brain surgery, chemo, and the unforeseeable consequences after such a massive surgery. And that in a 2-year-old. There were such cases at the AKH in Vienna. They are killing our children there. That is sadistic torture to death, and lucrative. They all make a fortune from it. I have the deepest contempt for such people. Hummer focus on the organ level. Then we find this Hummer focus also on the level of the organs. On the left side you see the liver. Of course, there is also a corresponding Hummer focus in the brainstem. How exactly these are connected is still unknown. But they must be connected. But nobody knows how. There is an intervertebral disc in the middle. The left area is older. There you can see a necrosis. The connective tissue of the cerebellum, the third law. The upper one is still relatively new. There you can still clearly see the ejection site of the intervertebral discs. The right side is the outer skin. A healing of a separation conflict. Hummer focus on animals. Or here in the fur of a dog. This was initially bullseye shaped. A year later it seems to be a hanging healing. If you suddenly touch the dog in this place, he shows you that this is not wanted. He wanted to be separated from my hand. I held him there and pushed him into a flight box. He somersaulted and took off. That happened about 3 or 4 times, so I held him even tighter. When we got to Vienna, the dog crate was full of shit, and he was paralyzed. He couldn't escape. And a prime example of a Hummer focus. So, the individual hairs were light, dark, altogether a target, as if they had been drawn with a felt tip pen. Those who had adopted the dog promised to photograph it, but they did not do so for a year. When I visited them again, it appeared to be a hanging healing, with an accumulation of edema. If you suddenly touch him in that place, he bares his teeth. Please don't touch me there. I had a bad experience there once. So, you can literally see that the conflict is not yet overcome, it is not yet overcome psychologically, the dog has stored the position. Apart from that, he's a lovely dog. That was a long time ago. Hummer focus on plants. You can also find this Hummer focus on the leaves of plants. Typically in late summer, at the first frost. That's the conflict. Then the sun comes again, and the leaf has its metabolism again. It's obviously trying to repair itself or something. Plants don't have a head brain as we do, they don't have to flee or hunt, either. You could say that they only have the brain organ. Actually, you have to look at it this way. Life began with a single-celled organism. The smallest unit, a simple set of chromosomes. But it was alive. Therefore the thing must have already had a brain. It wouldn't have worked any other way. Then the cells organized and one became a diploid, that is, one with two sets of chromosomes, male and female. That must have been a big step in the history of development. Then the cells organized themselves into an organ, so to speak, and on top of that came the main brain. But each cell has a mini-brain. When I have a conflict, the whole body is sympathetic. When I resolve it, the whole body is vagatonic. So, every cell always knows what is going on. In conventional medicine, cells are removed and viewed through a microscope. The entire body is no longer taken into account. Now you only see the cell, but it is no longer connected to the body. That is a significant source of error. But this is all academic medicine. I hope that one day this stupid conventional medicine will become obsolete. That's it for this seminar tutorial. For yourself, you can see here that the Hummer focus in the brain, and on the organ, is proof that it is the cause of all diseases that arise naturally. Hopefully, you are one step closer to the goal from belief to knowledge. In the seminar tutorial Brain Relay Brain Map, I explain in detail the location of the respective Hummer focus. See you at the following seminar tutorial. Helmut Pilhar, father of Olivia,